Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Well, Michael, Happy New Year to you.
Thank you.
Let's get ready to launch the show for Season 11. Michael, tell the audience, what do we have in store for the Season 11 theme?
As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. This season's theme is hard conversations. We'll take real client stories. Of course, we'll scrub their names to protect their confidentiality.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll take these stories, and they'll be built around confronting and having hard conversations. Now, Brad, they don't all have great outcomes, but there are plenty of teachable moments.
Yeah, and let's stay away from the bad breakup stories. I really don't think we want to hear about "it's not you, it's me" hard conversations.
All right, we'll try hard not to bring up too many of your painful memories, Brad.
Ouch.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears before we start. It's a new year. We got to start with something a little lighter. So, are you familiar with a person named Victor Wembanyama?
Well, first off, congratulations on getting the last name well said, because I would struggle with that one. Yes, and for those who don't know, you probably have heard this guy called the Greek Freak. Well, Victor is really the French Freak.
Okay, and for those who don't know, we're talking about basketball.
Yes.
We're talking about basketball players, and so, yes, Victor Wembanyama, Wemby, which is much easier for me to say,
Yes,
is from France, and he is widely considered the best NBA prospect since LeBron James. Now, let's put that in perspective a little bit here, because not everybody may be as big of NBA fans as you and me, Brad, but we're Dallas Mavericks fans, and we all in Dallas love Luka Doncic. He is widely accepted as a generational talent around the NBA. He's a favorite to win the MVP this year, and just incredible.
Yeah, and there have been several different MVPs in the recent years. Are you saying Victor is a better prospect than any of them?
That's the buzz, Brad.
Okay.
So think about this. LeBron last won the MVP in 2013. So here's a list of people who've won the MVP since LeBron last won it.
All right.
Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Russell Westbrook, Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek Freak.
The Greek Freak.
We'll just go with that. And Nikola Jokic. With the Denver Nuggets. And so these are all incredible players, iconic players, and that have won the MVP. Victor is considered a better prospect than any of those players when they came out.
All right, Michael, that's a lot of that's a lot to take in, but why is Victor so special?
Well, let's start with the physical attributes. So we'll date ourselves, of course, but I picture the Russian in like the Rocky Balboa movies.
Oh my God, you just did date yourself.
Yeah. So Victor is 7'4", and for context, a tall NBA player is 7 foot, maybe 7'1", and so he towers above the towers in the NBA. He has an 8-foot wingspan, which basically means that he can just stand there and swat away anything and everything that comes his way. LeBron James actually referred to him as an alien.
Yes, and so a couple different things. Number one, I think so. He's slightly taller than me, is what I heard.
A little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. And, with LeBron calling him an alien, I guess maybe he should know since he started in, the remake of Space Jam.
Yeah, nicely played there, Brad.
Yeah.
Okay, well, here's a quote I saw about Wemby that just stuck out to me. One NBA executive said, "He is not a franchise-altering talent. He is a league-altering talent."
Yeah, well, that could be considered a big talent.
Yeah. Well, supposedly he has an unblockable shot. He can alter shots, as I mentioned, without even leaving his feet. And he can shoot three-pointers like guards. And when I was reading this article, I actually got so curious. I went on YouTube and saw multiple clips of him dribbling the ball up the court like a point guard, and it's really bizarre looking at someone that's 7'4". But he's like the like I said, like the Russian in Rocky.
That would break cool. Yeah, it definitely. I think the French freak should stick now. It's very freaky.
Yeah, well, the hype is so big that the NBA is concerned about tanking.
Oh well, I think Riley. We just had our first vocabulary word of the day. For those that don't
season.
know, the season and day. So thank you, Mr. Miguel. Taking is really when a team just purposely loses. They intentionally do this because they're hoping to secure a better draft pick, and that's apparently what's happening because we've read some articles on this.
Yeah, and what's weird is that NBA, because there's only 5 players on a court, getting that type of player can alter a team from being bad to the playoffs in 1 year. They actually have preventative measures in place for many years to prevent tanking, and so they've created a lottery system, which basically says, every team in the NBA that does not make the playoffs will basically have a weighted chance in a lottery to get the first pick. And so the worst team will have a higher odds to get the first pick, but it's not significantly higher. And so that it doesn't really incentivize tanking.
Yeah.
But with Wemby coming in, the prediction for this year is that fringe playoff teams will actually tank to not make the playoffs just so they can have a chance to get in the lottery to draft Wemby.
Yeah. And, we've talked to and read articles over the years about how competitive athletes are. So I can't really imagine an NBA player purposely tanking. So it just doesn't seem to be in their blood. But I can imagine maybe certain organizations saying, I got to get more fans here. I got to put a winning team out there. So bench the best players.
Yeah, exactly. Well, before we transition to our story, all this Wemby talk made me curious. I have a feeling I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
All right.
Who do you, Brad, vote as the best football player of all time, and why?
Yeah, that's easy. Everyone who listens to the show knows I'm voting for Drew Brees. Look, he got us to our first and only Super Bowl, got us to several NFC championship games.
Well, who's us?
Us, the Saints. Sorry, people. Yes, Drew Brees, Saints fan, New Orleans. Besides, setting these insane records. I mean, he's not a very tall guy and set all kind of crazy quarterback records. And I know there's other people who will have these intelligent arguments, which probably makes sense about why he's not the best player ever. Great. But it's just, you're not going to convince me otherwise. It's the fan side of me.
Short guy wins the Super Bowl for the Saints. Yeah, I can see why you.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
What are you saying, Michael?
Nothing.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to ask you a vote and see if this hits close to you. Tell the audience, who would you pick as the greatest typist or greatest tennis player of all time?
Well, I'm afraid the audience won't connect with typing talk as we go into, the greatest talents. So I'm going to go to tennis, which may not be everybody's cup of tea anyway, but it is, as you know, my cup of tea.
Yes.
And so I'm a big tennis player. I grew up playing tennis and have started playing in the last 5 years again competitively, and so you and I have talked before, Brad. Just to give some context to this answer. And we talk about teaching our kids math and how frustrating it is because the way we learn to do math is different than the way they teach math nowadays. Yes. Yeah, everyone can relate at some level to that experience.
Oh, yeah.
Well, believe it or not, tennis has some similarities.
Huh.
So there's this, what they call modern tennis. And so the way I was taught to play tennis, like the style of ground strokes, the way they taught it when I was growing up is different than how the game has evolved. And so it's actually been an adjustment for me to adapt to the modern game and the modern style since I started playing. Well, all of that is really, I think, credited to Roger Federer, who is my vote for the best player of all time. Now, it is a tight race. There's the 3 tennis players who all have been a part of this same generation, Rafael Nadal and the Joker, Djokovic, and so they, in fact, Roger doesn't have the most Grand Slams of all time, but he was the first, and he's one of the most elegant players, and he completely changed the game of tennis, and so and he's my favorite. So that's.
I figured you'd yell out McEnroe. Because if you say McEnroe, you get to yell his name. All right, audience members, we'll get out of sports talk. So that was a lot of fun for us to open up season 11. Pretty easy conversations for us to get into some type of sports. We covered basketball, tennis, typing, football, all the important elements. So what are we doing today with this hard conversation?
Okay. Well, today our hero is not an athlete, but he does actually look like Roger Federer.
Yeah, that was a big stretch there, buddy, taking sports talk into these hard conversations.
I couldn't help it, man. I was picturing the client who I won't obviously identify, and that made me start thinking about athletes, and it reminded me of the Wemby story.
Right.
I shouldn't let people too far into my brain.
Yes,
Yeah.
That's a really fair assessment.
Okay, all right, let's get going. Our client in this story today will be called Dr. Roger.
Oh my gosh, that's such a surprise, Riley. I'm shocked.
Yeah. He is a doctor. Oh, you meant the Roger? Yes. Yeah, that looks like Roger Federer.
Federer, right?
Got it. Okay. Well, Dr. Roger is a plastic surgeon who is looking to start his practice in Miami, Florida. Mm-hmm. His family and his wife's family lived in Miami, so they were all in when looking for their first job to be able to go home.
So far, so good. Relatively common story.
Yes, agree. Dr. Roger hired us at the front end of his job search when he was kind of starting to have preliminary conversations to become an employee with a senior plastic surgeon in Miami. We'll call him Dr. Nadal.
Of course. You have to bring in more tennis talk here. All right. I guess we're going to have tennis names for every episode now, or just this one?
Just today, Brad.
Okay.
This conversation with Dr. Roger turned out to be important because this preliminary conversation that he and I had, because we started with the whole, plan A, plan B conversation.
Oh my gosh. We have our second vocabulary word for this season, which is, you said plan A and plan B. Michael, this is a term we use at our office all the time, especially when we're talking to anyone on their moves and contracts and building up their clinics. What does this mean? Tell the audience, what does that mean?
So when we're, on the front end trying to figure out, an opportunity for one of our clients, we want to understand what's their vision for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it'll be, especially when it's someone coming out of school, I'll say, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, what if this plays out perfectly, what does this look like in 5 years? And that starts to shape out what your plan A looks like.
Did anyone ever say a professional typist?
Yeah, that was my plan B, Brad.
Okay, yeah.
But
sorry.
My plan A was being your partner, even though I didn't know you yet.
Yeah.
Plan B is just that. Like, what are you going to do if things don't work out with your plan A? Mm-hmm. And so it's your contingency plan.
Yeah, and when we talk to people about this, there's a lot of different forces that they have to accept when they're building this. Where are they from? Where is their spouse from? What are their needs for cash versus, what is their burn? I mean, they're obviously, especially if they're coming out of school for the first time or they're trying to bring on a partner for the first time, they have to balance all those elements in that plan A and plan B. But audience members, let's jump back into our doctor story today.
Yeah.
So where are we in the story then?
Yeah, and so Dr. Roger was excited by the opportunity to join forces with Dr. Nadal. Dr. Nadal is a famous plastic surgeon with a thriving practice. So part of Dr. Roger's plan A as far as his clinical specialty and the types of cases he was going to be doing was all lining up with Dr. Nadal. Dr. Roger was going to handle initially all the body work while Dr. Nadal handled all the facelifts and kind of the other above-the-neck type surgeries, and this was going to be great. He was going to get enough cases to get his boards and really start building his reputation in the Miami community.
Well, it sounds pretty good so far. All right, so had Dr. Nadal made a formal offer to Dr. Roger at this point?
No, it was a little early. They were introduced at a plastic surgery meeting and had connected kind of on these clinical discussions I just mentioned.
Yeah.
And so when I first spoke to Dr. Roger, he was scheduled actually to do an office visit with Dr. Nadal, and the talks were expected to get a little more focused at that point.
Well, and it's a good thing that he did that. They had opportunity to work together before they even decided to do something. But so what came out of the plan A, plan B conversation?
So, yes, Dr. Roger and I were working through it, it became super clear that as excited as Dr. Roger was about the opportunity to work with Dr. Nadal, the most important thing to Dr. Roger was going to be going home and setting up his practice in Miami. Like he was all in to practice in Miami for his career.
Yeah, and that's great information, though, and so I'm sure the audience is trying to wonder the same thing. The elephant in the room, Michael, is I'm sure it's whether Dr. Nadal was going to have a non-compete in his contract.
Well, exactly, Brad. I mean, it was time for Dr. Roger to put his big boy pants on and have a hard conversation.
Dun, dun, dun. All right, Michael, we discussed having a fun sound or something this season, whatever. We kind of hit the point of the story where it's time to have that hard conversation. How does that sound?
Oh, Brad, at a minimum, let's have no singing when we hit this moment. And I wish we had a sound machine or something, but I know I'm not going to be able to control
it. You have a sound machine. It's called Brad.
Yes. Okay. Well, I will regretfully and reluctantly allow it.
Yes. All right. Well, so let's get back to, what was Dr. Roger going to say since we're having this hard conversation?
Yeah, so we talked about the need to preemptively deal with this elephant in the room at the office visit. I mean, he knew that his absolute top of the list part of his plan A was he needed to be in Miami, he needed to be able to stay in Miami. Yeah. So we rehearsed the messaging so that it would come across as respectful. Mm-hmm. The ultimate message was that because he was moving to Miami to be with his family and he was going to practice in Miami for his career, he could not sign a contract with a non-compete.
Well, so did he have the nerve to actually do it at Dr. Nadal's office?
Yeah.
During the visit?
Yeah, absolutely. And he, actually, Dr. Roger did a great job. Oh. He shared with Dr. Nadal, and Dr. Nadal was extremely positive. He said he would not have a non-compete and even went so far as to say that he did not like non-competes because they're not enforceable anyway. Yeah. Now, side note, Brad, he must not have listened to our red flag season because we had an episode on red flags. Non-competes are not enforceable, but that's getting a little off point.
It sure is a little bit. But so, okay, well, so amazing that he had this hard conversation to him. So they're now partners, and we're going to go to the happily ever after scene?
Not exactly.
Oh.
Dr. Roger actually never started practice with Dr. Nadal.
Wait. What? I think we missed something in the story. You're missing something, Michael. Go back. You said they had a conversation about the non-compete. Michael, you have some explaining to do here.
Okay. Well, after the great meeting, it was time to go to the employment contract phase to memorialize the relationship.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Well, the contract arrived, and it had, you guessed it, Brad, a non-compete. Not just any non-compete, a non-compete covering the entire city of Miami.
Okay, so there's like two boats passing in the middle of the night. We got a massive disconnect here.
For sure. Dr. Roger had no idea why it was included. Thankfully, he called me immediately and sent it to me immediately. And my initial thought was, okay, let's not overreact here.
Yeah.
Dr. Nadal may not have passed this message on to his attorney about the hard conversation. Mm-hmm. And so the lawyer put the non-compete in. So let's find out. So Dr. Roger agreed. He decided to play it cool, and he reached out to Dr. Nadal.
Well, since you already ended the story that they weren't working together, I guess it didn't go well since he didn't join the practice?
Wow, Brad, pretty smart there.
I was paying attention.
Nice deductive reasoning. Okay, Dr. Nadal told him in that conversation, he said, well, that his buddy, who was also a plastic surgeon, and his lawyer insisted that he had to have a non-compete. So Dr. Nadal went along with it.
Okay, so how did Dr. Roger respond?
Well, I was proud of him because he stuck to his boundaries and just said and followed through with what he had said, that he could not join with the non-compete. Dr. Nadal beat around the bush, trying to talk him into it, kind of alluding to dropping it. He'd say, I'll go talk to my lawyer and to my friend again. But ultimately, he wouldn't remove it. And so Dr. Roger walked and decided to start his own practice in Miami.
Yeah, so how did how do you feel about the strategy to address this non-compete up front? Because it didn't work, Michael, in the sense that he didn't end up going with this contract or going to join this group. obviously because of the non-compete.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, he was definitely disappointed with the outcome, but ultimately he was happy with the strategy. He found out that Dr. Nadal would have been a terrible partner because of the way he handled that conversation. I mean, Dr. Nadal gave him lip service and told him everything he wanted to hear, and then, kind of passive aggressively did the bait and switch and gave him a huge non-compete. And really, it would have come up in contract negotiations anyway if he had not had the hard conversation, and it actually would have been a much more difficult conversation because it would have been in the throes of contract negotiations.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for our audience members, think about this: they're wasting each other their time if neither one of them could really agree to this piece of the non-compete. And to us, we think it's better just to be addressed up front.
All right, well, Brad, let's go to break, and after we come back, let's talk about some lessons to be learned from the Dr. Roger contract story.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, Brad Datto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Now, Michael, this season 11, our theme is hard conversations. Dr. Roger learned leaning into these hard conversations on the front end doesn't always work out, though.
I know, it's a bummer, and many may wonder, why did we even lead this season off with a seemingly unsuccessful hard conversation?
Yeah, let's just reset here, all right? Dr. Roger, on the front end, communicated the importance of living in Miami and that he would not be willing to sign this non-compete because that's where he had to be. And at first, Dr. Nadal agreed. And then when the contract came, there was a non-compete in it, and everything obviously turned sideways from there on.
Yeah, and I know you and I, Brad, we would both agree that though this did not work, having the hard conversation, that this is the best possible outcome.
Yeah, and unfortunately, or fortunately, Dr. Nadal also revealed his true colors, that the contract was not what he thought it would, that Dr. Federer was not what he thought it would be, and so it didn't get signed. And Michael, maybe we can just talk about why thinking, or when you're doing your plan A and plan B, why it's so important.
Well, ultimately, we believe that the most important thing that comes out of a signed contract, when it's done correctly, is alignment of expectations on both sides.
Wait, Michael, what do you mean by when done correctly?
Well, the parties actually have to know what they want and communicate about it. This is why Plan A and Plan B is so important. This helps our client be clear about what is important to them.
Yeah, there's also common mistakes made. The results of signing a contract without this alignment of expectations. For example, a young physician will sometimes just sign the contract on the premises that not negotiating, or they sign blindly. In season 4, Michael, we had this entire podcast called Signing Blindly, Physician Employment Agreements with Gary Tuma. And Dr. Tuma really, in this episode, really talked about this, how it affected him, where he just signed the agreement and they said, this is the best deal you're going to get. You have to sign it and don't try to negotiate it. And he just did. And he didn't even try to negotiate and realize what a mistake that was for him.
Yeah, and there's clearly no alignment of expectations. He just took what they gave him.
Right.
And the flip side, too, is, if a client is just focused on trying to win their contract negotiation without actually having hard conversations to try to find alignment, that also is not, kind of, quote, done correctly where you're seeking this alignment. And we actually had another episode, last season, when we did the other people's problems on the Dancing Doctor, and I had the little side story about our client who just decided to go for broke and ask for everything, but he didn't. The elephant in the room was that he had some sense that there was not, clinical alignment there. And of course, he found out the hard way that he had just partnered with the dancing doctor.
So you mentioned hard conversations again. Dr. Roger clearly had his plan A and plan B. What was the goal with the hard conversation?
So once you know your plan A and plan B, you're equipped to understand what works for you and what doesn't work for you. You're empowered, but you then have to communicate it. And so what made this so hard for Dr. Roger is that non-competes are a touchy subject.
Yeah.
It's like you're going in talking about what happens if I leave, and it really can put the exciting opportunity on a sour taste because you're talking about, these bad outcomes, circumstances. So the goal always with a hard conversation should be to communicate what needs to be said about your own plan A, plan B, so that there's at least hope for alignment.
Yep.
What some people do that is not healthy and can lead to problems is their goal is to actually control the outcome or control the response of the other person. And so, I think we've all learned a lesson or two along the way that if you try to control the behavior of someone else, you're going to be disappointed. And so if Dr. Rogers' goal with this, having the hard conversation was making sure he did his part in finding alignment, then it can be successful.
Yeah, and in this case, Dr. Nadal basically kind of did the slow no, where he agreed, but then he really didn't agree, and there was really not alignment. In fact, this is what happened. I mean, thankfully, the important area of non-alignment was discovered really before they really started pursuing and getting deep into the contract, and obviously before it was signed.
Yeah, exactly. It would have been less painful had Dr. Nadal spoken up at the time of the hard conversation, but still, the fact that they were able to deal with this and part ways before they started working together saved significant heartache.
Yeah, sure did. So what happened with Dr. Roger?
Well, Dr. Roger opened his own practice in Miami after that, and it was tough going for him at the early stages because opening your own practice is risky and difficult, particularly when you're just starting out.
Yeah.
But Dr. Roger's still fighting the good fight, and most importantly, according to his plan A, he is in Miami with his family.
That's awesome. And what about Dr. Nadal?
I don't know for sure, but I believe he's still looking for an associate to join his practice, and I can only hope that he is more clear on his own plan A and plan B now. So as we wrap up today, Brad, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, most people, when they get that first contract, they only focus in or examine the compensation section. They go so blindly in that it's, hey, my goodness, I'm getting my first paycheck ever, and everything else will just kind of fall into place. And they really fail to take that step back and examine all the elements of why, in some cases, they should be joining the group, or if you're offering it, why you should have someone join you. And that's why I know that you and I really do love the idea of the plan A and plan B, because it does provide that roadmap of the direction as to which best for your career. And of course, we're not saying, don't sign an employment agreement that has a non-compete, because they're, again, depending on your plan A and plan B, it might not be that big of a deal. You just have to look at all the factors that impact your plans. Michael, final thoughts.
There's no shortcuts around a hard conversation, and actually the NBA teams that are thinking about tanking could learn a lesson or two from Dr. Roger, because tanking in the hopes of getting this generational talent is not going to work out. You're taking shortcuts around doing the right thing, and the same goes in business, and in this case in a contract negotiation. And if you skip the hard conversation, it's only going to come back to bite you later. Dr. Nadal is a great example of what not to do, because he tried to placate Dr. Roger instead of turning into the hard conversation. And then it made the situation way more awkward and challenging than it could have been.
Yeah, well, Michael, that's all the time we have for opening of season 11. But audience members, stay tuned. Next Wednesday, we have another hard conversation. And this one won't go as well as the last one, because sometimes if you don't listen to advice, it might just bite you in the... Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.